Dominique Wilkins wasn't afraid of Michael Jordan. In fact, he relished the challenge. While other stars backed down, Meek went straight at him. He had beaten MJ before. He had outscored him. But in 1993, that rivalry came to a brutal, undeniable end. This is the story of how Michael Jordan ended the Dominique Wilkins era once and for all. For nearly a decade, Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan battled above the rim, defying gravity every time they faced off. Their war started in 1985. Wilkins dominated the dunk contest, and Jordan had to watch. 3 years later, MJ struck back with the most legendary free throw dunk in contest history. But this wasn't just about that. It was about dominance. In 1986, Wilkins put 57 on Jordan's Bulls and walked away with the W. In 91, they combined for 80 points in a duel for the ages. Wilkins had proven he could match Jordan bucket for bucket, dunk for dunk. But in 93, all of that history, it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time ever, Wilkins wasn't just fighting for being in the spotlight. He was fighting to survive, to become the best player in the league.
It was Dominique who got the jam. What a shot.
For much of their careers, MJ and Wilkins were extremely comparable players. Both arrived in the league at practically the same time. Both were two of the most unprecedented athletic prodigies of their generation. Both were capable of getting a bucket when their team needed it most. And most importantly, both hated that comparison, because in their minds, each of them was the best. But the only reality is that, since they arrived in the NBA, the duels between these two players were as fierce as any Quentin Tarantino movie. One of the most iconic, in fact, didn't even come in an NBA game. MJ and Dominique faced each other in the 1985 Slam Dunk Contest, where they delighted fans with a catalog of iconic dunks. Now, that night, it was Dominique who came out on top. Although only 3 seasons later, the NBA wanted to revive this rivalry by putting them against each other again on the same stage. And this time, MJ made sure that the same thing wouldn't happen. With his dunk from the free throw line, Jordan went down in history not only for doing something that everyone considered impossible, but also for having defeated the man who at the time had been able to beat him. And also, he performed what may be the most iconic dunk in the history of the Slam Dunk Contest. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's what everyone knows. The only reality is that when the Bulls and the Hawks faced each other, sparks flew.
I remember Michael Jordan walks in our locker room before the game. We in suit and tie, haven't gotten dressed yet. He walks in our locker room, and I'm like, what the hell is he doing? So I'm thinking maybe going to the training room or something. So he walks by me, he walks by Kevin Willis, and he gets to Randy Whitman, and he slaps him on behind. And he said, lace him up, it's going to be a long night. He turned and walked out.
In December 1986, the two teams played a game in which Jordan and Wilkins combined for 98 points. Jordan got 41, and it didn't matter because Dominique got 57, and the W. Now, another example. In December 1991, Jordan and Wilkins combined to score 80 points. Dominique scored 43, and Michael Jordan 37. And this time, it was the Bulls who took the win. As you can see, it had never been a one-sided rivalry. Dominique also had moments of greatness when it seemed that his bid to become the best player in the world was a real possibility. In fact, Wilkins is in the top 20 of all-time players with the most 50-point games in the history of the league. Needless to say, so is Michael. But nevertheless, something very curious happened. Despite the fact that Michael and Dominique had shared a conference throughout their careers, and that both were on teams with relative success in the postseason, they never crossed paths in the playoffs. The Hawks and the Bulls simply, whether by fate or not, did not coincide in the postseason. Or, at least, they didn't until 1993. The Atlanta Hawks, led by Wilkins and Kevin Willis, were not an extremely dominant team. During the 92-93 season, they had been average in many aspects, both offensively and defensively. But at the end of the season, the chemistry began to kick in. The Hawks won 17 of their last 25 games in the regular season and came out strong in the playoffs, where they believed they could surprise anyone. And when Dominique realized they would be playing the Chicago Bulls, he knew that finally, his chance to show the world that he could beat Jordan had finally arrived. But the Bulls that Dominique had played against for most of his career were no longer there. They were a new monster, a new version of themselves that seemed more powerful than ever. After winning the championships in 1991 and 1992, Chicago had become the dominant dynasty in the league. Michael had discovered how to win, and since then he couldn't stop doing it. The Bulls were going for the three-peat with all their might, hoping to become the first team to do it since Bill Russell's Celtics. With a record of 57 wins and 25 losses, and with Michael Jordan, who had once again led the NBA in scoring, they were ready for anyone. Stars? Didn't matter. Defensive powerhouses? Still didn't matter. Nothing and no one could stop Chicago. That's why the first round of the 1993 playoffs went down in history for several reasons. Everyone wanted to see that duel between Mike and Dominique in the playoffs, and each of them had a plan to finish the other off. So when that April 30th, 1993 arrived, both teams prepared for what would be an all-out battle. Of course, it took MJ seconds to land the first blow and light the fuse with a mid-range jumper that was the first bucket of the series. But that would only be the beginning, because in the middle of his athletic prime, Michael wanted to humiliate Dominique Wilkins. At that point in his career, it seemed impossible to make him miss a shot from the mid-range. But Dominique was ready to do the same. He ended up playing a solid 24-point game with decent efficiency in front of Jordan's eyes. Now, the game only lasted for 3 quarters, because Jordan really tore apart the Atlanta defense during the 29 minutes he played. Michael scored 35 points with 58% from the field, as well as grabbing 7 rebounds and dishing out 5 assists. These are numbers that would make it a playoff career night for practically any player in the league. But for Jordan, it was just another day at the office. Although the Bulls were clear favorites to win the series, they didn't want to relax for even a second. That's why, at the end of the third quarter, the lead on the scoreboard was 30 points. The fans at Chicago Stadium, they witnessed a real massacre. But on the other hand, that brutal beating would only count as one victory. In the magic of the NBA playoffs, anything is possible. Dominique wanted to turn these possibilities into a certainty. As soon as Game 2 started, Wilkins wanted to prove it. The Atlanta Hawks superstar took to the court in Game 2 to become a difference maker. From the first second, he was sick of Jordan, sick of hearing about him. This time, he would personally take care of finishing him off. But Michael, as always, was ready to respond. Jordan began to offer his typical recital from the mid-range, knocking down jumper after jumper in the face of his defenders. But at the same time, he also tried to make life impossible for Wilkins, blocking him under the rim and applying pressure whenever possible. For a few moments, it seemed as if the game had become a one-on-one matchup. Dominique knocked down buckets at the same time as MJ, attacking the paint, which was full of Bulls players at every opportunity. But just when someone thought he was winning the individual duel against Michael, Jordan brought them back down to earth with the most unexpected shot imaginable. At least this time, the Hawks made it to halftime alive. Although once again, the Bulls dominated the third quarter to eliminate any hint of excitement. Once again, despite Wilkins' 37 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists in what was an incredible performance, it was all to no avail. Because Jordan, in addition to putting on a great offensive display, had one of the best defensive nights of his career. What more could the Hawks do? Even with a great performance from their star player, they weren't capable of competing in the game. Because we were no longer talking about beating the Bulls. We were talking about reaching the end of the game alive. Michael Jordan's masterclass on Dominique Wilkins was proving lethal in deciding a series that the Hawks roster thought they could win. However, in Game 3, an event took place that would give the Hawks wings, if it wasn't already too late. Game 3 started like any other. This time the Bulls were playing away from home, but Michael dominated from the start, both with his scoring and his playmaking. No player in the league could defend him at the low post. No player in the league could contain his drives. And although Atlanta won the first quarter for the first time in the series, the Bulls soon stepped up. In fact, at halftime, they were leading by 3 points. But in the third quarter, disaster struck. Michael Jordan suffered a sprained right ankle at the end of the third quarter that forced him to leave the court. Dominique finally saw his chance to hurt the Bulls. With the bad luck that Jordan not only returned for the beginning of the fourth quarter, but also scored 14 of his 39 points after suffering the injury. Chicago didn't just win the game, they dominated the fourth quarter to deal the final blow to a team that was nearing its end. And just like that, it was over. The battle that had raged for years ended in 3 brutal games. Dominique Wilkins had given everything. He had fought, he had scored, and it still wasn't enough. Jordan and the Bulls didn't just beat Atlanta, they ended them. This was Dominique Wilkins' last playoff series with the Hawks. The franchise that had built around him for a decade moved on. Within a year, he was gone, traded for Danny Manning in a move that stunned fans. The message was clear. Atlanta had lost faith that Wilkins could take them further. Unlucky? Maybe. But in Jordan's era, losing had consequences, and for Wilkins, it meant the end. Meanwhile, Jordan and the Bulls, they were just getting started. After sweeping Cleveland, they outlasted the Knicks and dismantled Charles Barkley's Suns for their first three-peat. By the summer of '93, the GOAT debate had changed forever.
But they don't begin to explain just how great a player Jordan has been. From time to time, we've heard Michael's own thoughts on his exploits.
Wilkins fought. He pushed Jordan to the limit. But in the end, MJ was inevitable. But here's the real question. Which legend gave Prime Jordan the toughest time? Was it Wilkins, Clyde, Reggie, someone else? Drop your pick in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with all our latest content. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.